We are in week 4 of a sermon series, this practical series that is for everyone, as we are talking about the power of our decisions. The power of our decisions. I believe that our decisions are incredibly important, and I would say that the quality of your decisions help determine the quality of your life. It doesn't control everything. There are uncontrollable factors that determine the path of your life. But I believe our decisions play a huge part in how we go about life. How we get from point A to point B. How we see God's will lived out in our lives. You make your decisions, and then your decisions end up making you. And we determined in week 1 that with God's help, we can and should make good decisions. It's that simple. Make good decisions. I said then, and I'll say now, we tell our kids that often. Very often. Make good decisions. Make good choices. Be smart. I tell the kids I coach baseball to, make good decisions. Charlie can tell you, I say this to them often, win the game up here and then go win it out there. Because a lot of it starts here and it's mental. And life is the same way. We've got to win it here first. Then we discussed how consistency has the potential to greatly impact our life when we do something consistently and consistently well. First, consistently depending on God and understanding that we're nothing without Him in our life. And then last week we saw how living a life of devotion to Christ, seeking Him first, the one who matters the most, remaining in Him as He is the vine and we are the branches. When we do that, we posture ourselves to be good decision makers. We posture ourselves to be good decision makers. So today, we're not only going to become better decision makers, we're going to corporately put it into action. We're going to corporately put it into action. On any given day, you are exposed to advertisement after advertisement. Ad after ad after ad you're exposed to. In fact, studies show that you are exposed to as many as 10,000 ads in one day. In one day. Now you may say, there's no way. Oh, there's a way. Between social media and digital billboards and YouTube and television, radio, all these operate from sponsors, from people who do advertisements, who pay them money to try to get us to use their services or to buy their products, to go visit their location. As a matter of fact, some of you may agree with me when I say, when it comes to advertisements, I think our phones are listening to us. They see you when you're sleeping. Because you can be talking to someone about wanting to buy new furniture, and then you get on Facebook or YouTube and you start scrolling on your smartphone and you start seeing all these ads for furniture stores. It certainly is tracked in your phone. Go open your smartphone, pull up the internet, and search for furniture. And I promise you the analytics will follow you. And they will then show up in your social media feeds and other places. Oh, Danny's shopping for a new mattress. We just happen to know of 12 places in his community that are selling mattresses. And they even have a Memorial Day sale coming up. Let's send that his way. Ad after ad after ad coming at you. The culture just screams at you that if you want to be happy, you need to go and get these things. You need to go be a part of what they're selling you. In fact, culture tells us that you need to accumulate more. You need to add more of this into your life. And that you can only have a good, happy life if you've got the latest and greatest of things. Now you might say, Pastor, but that's not me. You should go to like a middle school, an elementary school. I promise you, the younger generation, they understand what it means to have the latest and greatest. And if you don't have the latest and greatest, then well, you're not cool. Why? Because that's the way culture and society has created people. We're inundated with these ads, and we're told 10,000 times a day that it's more blessed to receive and to get. But yet Jesus had this countercultural approach. Matter of fact, he's recorded as saying this in Acts chapter 20 and verse 35. It is more blessed to give than to receive. And at this point in the message, most of you have understood what the topic of today's discussion is. And I hope nobody gets up and walks out. Hear me out first. Give me a chance. Give the Lord a chance today. You hear me say stuff about it's better to give than it is to receive, and those are just the words of Christ. Don't turn me off. Okay? Don't turn me off. Because I can be guilty of that as well. And I'll admit it. I was listening to a radio station a few weeks ago. And it's a Christian radio station. I love what they do, and I'm happy to support what they do. But they go on these give-a-thon stretches where they have to ask for money. And I'll just admit it. I turned the channel. Yeah, some of y'all are agreeing with me. Thank you for being honest and not judging me. They just go on and on. I'd rather hear an ad than to hear you. Oh, we've got Donna from Lafayette, Georgia, and she's calling in. Thank you for your $200 gift. I'm just like, man, I'm here to hear music. I want to hear music. And these are ad-free radio stations that do this, and I get it. So don't turn me off today. Don't do like your pastor does. Don't turn me off today. Hear what God has for us. You see, you will be happier, as Jesus says. You will be happier. You'll be more fulfilled. You'll experience the power, the transforming power of giving when you're generous, not when you receive. And what I know about so many of you, perhaps all of you, is that you know that. I've not shared anything with you up to this point in this sermon that you don't already know. You understand the importance of giving versus receiving. You know that. You're familiar with Acts 20:35. And many of you would love to even give more. Perhaps you gave something in offering today and you were like, man, I wish I just could give more. Or maybe you didn't get to give today and you were like, I just can't do it in May. Maybe June, but May's just not going to work. I've got to get brakes on my car, and so I just can't give to the Lord today. You would love to do more, and you just feel like you can't. And that's why today I want to talk to you about becoming radically generous. We're going to make a decision today to be more generous. We're going to make a decision. Not only as individuals, not only as families, we're going to make a decision. And perhaps you don't make that decision on your own. But we as a body, as a corporate body, as a church, are deciding today we're going to be more generous. We're going to be more generous. Why? Because you have to make this decision, otherwise it won't happen. Nobody accidentally just becomes generous one day. No one just by chance stumbles upon the idea to give to the church through tithe and offering. Or paying the rent for someone who's in need. You don't just accidentally buy groceries for someone who can't afford them, or give to a ministry, or fund a mission trip. You don't just accidentally show up to church and say, you know what, I'm going to give 10%. You know, this is so fun, I think I'll give 15 next year. How about 25? Why don't I just give 25% of my income to the church? That doesn't just happen accidentally. You don't just accidentally give and give to the Lord, and then all of a sudden you just accidentally have this great inheritance that you can leave to your children and your children's children. That's not an accident. You see, what we tend to think is we want to be more generous, but we just don't think we can. And we also tend to have this idea that when I have more one day, then I'll give more. One day when I can afford it, I will then start giving. But here's what I want you to understand. That's not how generosity works. That's not how generous people think. Generosity is not about what you have or you don't have. Generosity is about the heart. It doesn't start with what you have available to you financially. It starts right here. Because I know some rich people who are stingy suckers. But I know some wealthy people who have done radical things through generous gifts to change the world even. It's unreal. So, all our kids here today, I just read this week. Any of our kids know who Mr. Beast is? Oh, look, our kids know who Jeff knows who Mr. Beast is. And Jeff's watching YouTube Kids, I reckon, or something. Mr. Beast is this YouTuber, I think. He's this big YouTuber guy. He's famous. Good guy from what I hear. He's made millions. He's made a lot of money. And I saw just this week, Charlie's told me this before. He's like, Dad, he randomly gave 1,000 people like $1,000 or something. And I saw this week where he paid for 1,000 people to get hearing implants so they could begin to hear for the first time. 1,000 people. Because that's how generous people think. This guy didn't turn out, you can't tell me he turned out this way and decided to be generous because he finally has money. No, he's always had a heart for generosity. But I also know poor people who will sacrificially be generous as well. Who will give you their last bit. I heard a story recently of this pastor who made this statement from the pulpit about how much he loved to eat meat, but his wife was kind of like a vegetarian or whatever. And he was a meat eater, and he was like, I'm a man, I have to have meat. This is a true story. He said, I have to have meat. A few weeks later, he goes on a missions trip over to Africa or somewhere, and he goes and meets with this family who they bless and they sponsor. And this lady of the home had heard his message about him loving meat. And so she saved up their meat for the weeks leading up to him coming so that he could have meat to eat when he got there. That's generosity. That's here. That's not about having it or waiting until you have it. That's a heart. That's saying in your heart, hey, I'm choosing to have a heart to be generous. And knowing that, hey, this guy didn't need meat. He pastors a big church. He does fine for himself. He could buy his own meat. It wasn't about that. It was about her being generous to him. Because see, generosity is more than just meeting a need. It's just loving on others. And sometimes we don't want to be generous to someone else because we just sit back and say, well, they don't need it. That's not our decision to make. If God says do it, then you do it. We're going to learn how to be generous now. Because I believe if you're generous now, if you're not generous now, you won't be generous later. So we're going to learn generosity today. Right where you are. Right where your circumstances have you. Luke chapter 12. Luke's Gospel chapter 12. Verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me to be a judge or arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed." This is Jesus talking. This is not your pastor here, folks. This is Jesus' words that live today and breathe today and are applicable to us today. Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. And he told them this parable, this story. The ground of a rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, the rich man, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." This guy's got these abundance of crops and he doesn't know what to do with them. Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns, my little tiny barns, and I'll build bigger barns. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool." I hope none of us are living a foolish financial lifestyle. You fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? Because these things are temporary. This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. May God add his blessing to his word. In this parable from Jesus, the rich man got richer and richer and richer, and to the point that he didn't know what to do with all of his riches. Can you imagine if you got a call from your bank one day and said, "Hey, we can't hold any more of your money. You've had just way too much." What would your next call be? Would it be to go make an appointment at another bank and say, "Hey, I'm going to need to open an account here to transfer some funds"? Or would you just say, "Well, you know what? Well, then I guess I have too much. I guess I'll give it away"? We see people do that here with like crops and stuff. How many times do you see people walk around here with eggs? We love to give eggs away here, man. Why? Because you get them chickens that just go to town and you got too many and you can't eat them fast enough before they go bad. And so there's eggs everywhere. If you need eggs, just talk to the right people right here. We got some hustlers that hustle eggs. Because at a point, it gets to a point where you're just like, "Well, I just have too much." The rich man's here. His sources increased, and what did he do when his situation changed for the good? He did what he had always done. What he didn't do is say, "Well, you know what? I'll give the extra to the church." He didn't say, "Well, I'm going to go help single moms. I'm going to go help scholarship a young person to go to college. I'm going to go fund the pantry at that church down the street." He didn't say that. The rich man got richer and he did what he had always done because it wasn't a matter of the heart. More money just makes you more of what you already are. That's hard. I didn't expect anybody to say amen right there. More money makes you more of what you already are. what you have chosen to be today with what you have. More money doesn't change who you are. It just reveals who you are. And if you want to be generous when you have more, then you have to learn to be generous when you have less. With what you have, with where you're at. And I know God's people, I know those that are here today and those that are watching, you want to be more generous. And you just don't feel like you can sometimes. Well, I want to show you a couple of qualities to help you learn to be more generous. Because giving is not just something you do. Generosity is an identity. It's an identity. I don't want anybody to say, well, that Ashley Mew, he was a generous guy in what he did. No, I want people to identify me as a generous person. I want people to identify me and my family as that way. I want people to identify our church as a church of generosity. That gives and gives and gives and blesses and blesses and blesses to meet the needs. And as God leads us. 2 qualities of generous people. Number 1, generous people plan to be generous. Generous people plan to be generous. Y'all are familiar with spontaneous generosity. We've all done that. And there's nothing wrong with spontaneous generosity. Let me give you an example. I guess there could be something wrong with it. I got to take a drink. This is going to be good. My wife calls me one day. She'd been in a drive-through restaurant. I think it might have been, I don't know where it was. It was a drive-through restaurant here in Lafayette. And she calls me and she's laughing on the phone. And I'm like, what is going on? And she says, well, you're not going to believe what just happened. I said, what? She said, I went to, let's just say McDonald's. I went to McDonald's and I ordered some food for the kids. And I got up to the window and the lady looked at me and said, well, the car ahead of you paid for your meal. And she was like, oh my word, are you serious? It was like $12. And I was like, that's amazing. And the lady looks at her, doesn't even give Mitzi a chance to respond on her own, and says, do you want to do the same for the next car? Well, you're talking about guilt. You're talking about guilt generosity. That's it. And Mitzi was like, well, sure, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to be the one that stops this. And she's laughing and she's like, it was like $37. I looked at her and was like, never do that again. You look at her and say, no, I don't want to round up to the next dollar to give to your charity. So sometimes spontaneous generosity doesn't always work on your behalf. But we all are familiar with those moments when you're in a store and you see the person trying to buy groceries and they can't afford it. They don't have enough cash. They can't do it. Somebody on the side of the road that's got a sign and the cardboard sign and they're asking for your generous gift. There's nothing wrong with that. God is in those moments. He certainly is. He wants you to give, and giving that way honors God. But there's a difference between giving and being generous. There's a big difference between a giver and someone who's generous. Because generous people have a plan. They don't just wait for those opportunities to present themselves. They actually budget for it. Generous people have something in their budget every month that say, hey, I'm going to give $300 away this month in addition to what I give to my local church and these other missionaries and organizations that I support. That's what generous people do. They have a plan in place. Generous people don't have to be guilted into it. They don't need to be inspired by the Sarah McLachlan videos to save the animals. That stuff works. But that's going after the people that don't have a plan. Generous people, they don't just give when they have extra or when they're prompted by the Spirit or just when they have leftovers. Generous people plan ahead. Here's what Isaiah says. Isaiah 32 says, "But the noble make noble plans, and by noble deeds they stand." In other words, I'm not waiting until I have more. I'm not waiting until it's a good financial month. I'm not making excuses until then. I'm going to give and be generous because it's who I have chosen to be and who God has called me to be. Sometimes we don't want to hear that, but God has called us to be generous. When it comes to our finances, most of us already have a plan. You may say, "Well, Pastor, I don't have a financial plan. I live month to month. That's my financial plan." Well, that's your plan. The truth of it is that's your plan. We all have a plan to consume. I'm a planner, and I plan my spending. Matter of fact, sometimes I over-plan. Some of y'all are going to feel me. Because as frugal as I am, when it's time to purchase something, I'm going to try to save every dollar. I'll spend an hour to save $12. If I'm trying to find something online, I'm looking for a coupon code. I'm looking for the lowest, cheapest price. I'm looking for the one that has no shipping involved. I'm going to plan to save that $4 on that one item. And if I see that they're going to have a sale going on, I'm like, well, I'll wait and get that then. I bought some shoes a few weeks ago. I don't like to spend a lot of money on like tennis shoes or anything like that. I find them on sale. And I needed some tennis shoes bad. And I found a pair at Academy for $130. They were on sale for $80. They're $50 off. And Mitzi was like, go buy them. You need a good pair of tennis shoes. Like, they'll last you for years. And they do. I wear mine for years. She's like, it's $80. That's $50 off. I was like, yeah, but... Well, then they came down to like $65, and I thought, that's a much better deal. And Mitzi's like, go buy the shoes and quit talking about it. It's been like a week or two, man. I don't want to drop $65. So I wait, and I go online. I was like, well, $65 is not bad. I'm going to order these shoes. Turns out they're having an online sale, and the shoes have been reduced to $40. And I'm like, Mitzi, this is why you have a plan and patience. I got a $130 pair of shoes for $40. We need to have a plan because generous people have a plan. Unfortunately, sometimes our plan is just to have more. Because God blesses you and you see an increase, and maybe you get a pay raise, or maybe you take on a second job and you increase your financial place, your financial position. And what do? We go and we spend more to accommodate the money we just made. And even sometimes spending more than we make. And then we have no margin of profit, and we're wondering how we're going to get out of this credit card debt. I'm preaching to somebody today. I know I am. You see, we go to trusting in things rather than putting our faith in God. And what generous people do is they break this cycle and say, hey, I don't need more. I need to give more of what I have. They break this cycle by putting God first. You remember me saying last week, we read the text, seek Him first and His righteousness, His kingdom, and then all these other things will be added unto you. That's in the same chapter we just read a few moments ago. Seek first Him. That's what generous people do. For generous people, the first check they write of the month is to their church. The decision's made. I'm going to pay God my tithe and offering if I don't pay somebody else. You see, there's this principle in Malachi chapter 3, and it says this: bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. That absolutely sounds crazy, right? And if you're not familiar with the church and this scripture and what it means to be generous to God's house, that's difficult to. Let's say somebody gets saved for the first time. They've never heard about Jesus. They walk in and then they start learning about what it means to be a committed follower to him and to his church. And all of a sudden they're like, hey, what's this tithe thing? I've been living off 100% of my income for 40 years. And now you're telling me I got to all of a sudden just budget 10% of it away? That's radical. But this ministers to me so much because it means so much to God that for once in the text he tells us, test me on it. Where else does God say, hey, test me? In fact, we're not supposed to test God. He says, test me. He feels that strongly about it. He says, test me. And so generous people, they give it up front, first fruits. I got to preach at a church this past Wednesday night up in Rossville, Mercy Ridge. Some friends of ours, Tim and Heather Bailey, pastor up there. And I told you that it was much like our church. They kind of went in and relaunched it, restarted it. It was a dying church, just going under. God called them there to relaunch the ministries that were taking place. Here's what he told me Wednesday night. The four of us, Mitzi and I and them, were standing in the fellowship hall talking. And we were talking about their church and how God had blessed. And I was talking about our church and all that we had done over the last few years and how God had moved in our lives and been so faithful as we've been generous and as we've been obedient to him. And he looks at me and here's what he says to me. He says, Ashley, a couple of years ago, because they've only been there like 4 or 5 years. He said, a couple of years ago, it got so bad in our church that we had $3,000 in our account. $3,000. And I looked at my board and I said, there's no way we're going to pay our bills this month. We don't have enough. He said, I sat before my board and I said, if we can't pay the bills, then let's just not pay them. This is God's money anyway. We're going to follow his lead in this and trust that he's going to be faithful. And he said, actually, I looked at my board and I said, we're giving every bit of it away. All $3,000. And he said, unanimously around the table, they all agreed, yep. If we're going under with a bang. We're going to give it all away. He said, we gave all $3,000 away through benevolent ministry. He said, 6 weeks to the day, we had $100,000 sitting in our account. $100,000. Because we were obedient and we put him first. He had no idea I was preaching on this today. He was just feeding me info. Sermon material. He said, we put God first. I'm not saying that you're going to get rich if you do this. I'm not saying that you're going to become, if you become more generous, that God's just going to pour out blessings on you. I'm not saying that at all. What I will say is that he will be faithful to you. And he will take care of you if we first do what we're supposed to do according to his word. He says, if you don't believe in me in this, then test me on it. Someone in this church, I'll make it more personal. Someone in this church approached me just a few weeks ago, during tax season. This is someone that started giving to our church recently. And they came up to me and they said, Pastor, I've just got to tell you what God's done. I said, I'm ready. I love testimony time. They said, my family's been following as God is leading us in being obedient in our giving, faithful in our generosity. And it starts here. And this person looked at me and said, I look back at what we gave to God's house, this church last year, through tithe and offering, through giving. And they said to me, we've never given like this before. Like stepping out on obedience, in obedience to God. Sacrificially giving. This person said to me, they said, I went to go get my taxes done, and I got 15% more back in taxes than we gave to the church last year. And said, we've never gotten a return like that before. Never. 15% more than what they sowed into ministry last year here at this local church, God blessed them with. When you start with giving, you recognize that it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. And it changes the cycle. It changes your priorities. It changes the trajectory of your life. You might not have a lot to give, or you may not be able to give a lot, but giving is not what you do. Generosity is who you are. Who you are. It's a mindset that takes place when you put God first. We're not just going to give when it's convenient. We're going to give God our first. We're going to give Him our best, and we're going to trust Him to do the rest with what we have. Here's a second quality of generosity. Generous people bless others. Generous people bless others. Generous people are intentional about helping meet the needs of others as God leads them. Generous people are obedient to how God speaks to them in their generosity. Not just giving when they see a need, but trusting God to live out and be His hands and feet, even when they might think that the person really doesn't need the help. In my opinion, it's easy to be obedient. It's easy to be generous when we see a need. That's a lot easier. It's in those moments when God speaks to you and even puts you in kind of an awkward situation where you're supposed to be generous to somebody, and then you see the impact it has on their lives because you were obedient to the leading of God's Spirit. Listen to what Proverbs says. Proverbs 11 says this. Philip, you can come. Proverbs says this in chapter 11. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. What an interesting choice of words in this proverb. When I thought about this, I thought about the picture of a river. Water flowing from a mountaintop into a river. And the generous person is the river. And when a generous person is like a river, they not only refresh those that drink from their river, that they bless, but they also refresh the banks of that river. And everything that comes in contact with that generous person is made better. Life is improved for them. Here's the thing, as you allow God to lead you, you become somebody's answer to prayer through generosity. How many of you have ever been praying that God would provide for you in a financial situation? We're talking financials right now. And then out of nowhere, God sent you exactly what you needed. How many has that happened? Bunches of you. God sends you exactly what you need. What if you are that person to somebody else? What if you are somebody's answer to prayer in meeting their need? The very thing that they're seeking God for, God uses you to provide it. Through your generosity, through your heart of giving, your obedience, God meets this need and your life is changed and more fulfilled. You see, we don't need to trust what we have to become more generous. Listen to your pastor here. We don't need to trust what we have to become more generous. We need to trust God in what we don't see.